sure we're gonna have a lot of questions. So Rosie, it's all yours.
Great. Thank you for having me. I'm Rosie Deisty. I'm a project planner with City of Santa Barbara, and I'm managing the housing element update. So this is a great opportunity to let you know what's going on with that. And my 3:30 meeting was canceled, so I can stay on the call, which is great. So we've been working on a draft housing element update. It's required to be updated every 8 years, and staff's been working really hard on getting a draft ready for public review. This is the first draft that goes out to the public. And also we went to the Planning Commission last week, and we're going to City Council next week on July 26th with a overview of what's in the housing element and to ask for input. The public review period is from July 5th until August 3rd, and we'd like your comments. So you can either comment through the public hearing process or send an email, and I'll put in the chat where to find the draft and how to comment when I'm done. And so we need to plan for at least 8,001 units over the next 8 years, and a significant number of those should be affordable, deed restricted affordable for very low and moderate income people. And we really want your input. So it's a big document and there's a lot to look at, but if you really want to focus your input, I would recommend you look at the goals and the programs, because the programs are what's really committing the city to making changes to make more deed restricted affordable housing units available for our community. So coming to the City Council next week would be a great opportunity to tell them, you know, what you like, what you think should be added to the programs, what your priorities are. And, you know, again, it's the first 100 pages is a lot of text. There's a lot of demographics. There's information about people experiencing homelessness. The last chunk of the document is technical appendices. So it may seem a little overwhelming at first, but if you could really focus on the goals and the programs, that would be great. And again, I'll put some information in the chat and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Rosie. Will you put in the chat? You'll put in the chat kind of the opportunity. I know you're going for the Tuesday City Council. I know that Gabe will be talking a little bit about that and how to advocate and how to support some of the plans in place. But anything you want to put in the chat to help us with upcoming opportunities, that would be much appreciated. So Gabe, are you ready?
I'm ready.
All right, thank you so much. We spent a fantastic hour plus yesterday with Gabe of an SBAC team walking through the document. And I just want to say, very informative. I learned a lot, so I'm really excited you could join us and kind of walk us through, because I really invited I invited some faith communities, I invited some advocates, I invited new people to this call so that we can support what needs to happen. And I wanted to say specifically, when we're talking about our street population, I know there's other things connected to this housing element that the city needs to be involved in, but I'm very interested in the very low, the low to mid. So thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you, and good afternoon, everyone. I'll do my best to try and not get too much in the weeds, but Rosie did a great job of describing the housing element, and I wanted to take a moment to just talk about, and Rosie, feel free to jump in if I get anything wrong and mischaracterize anything. And I just want to say I'm here on my behalf, so a lot of what I'm going to say are my opinions and kind of what I think about this housing element. But I think there's a big distinction between this housing element and previous housing elements. Previous housing elements had a lot of goals, had a lot of potential programs, but so many goals and potential programs that we weren't able to really make a lot of traction on many of them. And what's different about this housing element is that the state has structured it in a way in which it is requiring jurisdictions to be very specific about what they will accomplish in that 8-year period. And I think many of us who have worked in housing and homelessness and in these any issue that kind of touches those areas, it can sometimes get a little bit, it could put you in a pessimistic mood because it feels like we're kind of having the same discussions over and over again, and it feels like we're not making traction. I think in reading much of the housing element, you're going to notice that much of the housing element is talking about current conditions and what is going on right now, talking about demographics, talking about how much of our population is rent burdened, talking about homelessness. And to be quite frank, in my opinion, a lot of that information is not hope inspiring, but I think when you look at what Rosie was talking about, the goals, the policies and programs, and what our plan is for the next 8 years and what we have in this draft and we're committing to accomplishing over that 8-year period, there's a whole lot to be hopeful about. And this housing element in particular has a lot that could really be the pivot point for the city of Santa Barbara and could really build the foundation as we look forward to building those affordable units Jeff referenced in the very low, the low, and that missing middle that we're talking about, and alleviate a lot of the strain that we see in our current rental market. So it's a 250-page document, but if you're limited on time and you really want to focus somewhere, I would say page 90, if you're looking at the PDF, it's page 92 of 250 is where it starts. And then if you happen to print it out, it's going to be page 85 of the housing element. But in here, there's a lot to be hopeful about in terms of if these are the types of programs that we're carrying into the next housing element cycle, we have a lot of opportunity. And so I wanted to spend a little bit of time of just talking about breaking down this particular section so that it's easy to digest, talking about some of the programs that I find very promising, that I think particularly in these RAP discussions and the work that we're doing are very related to all of the work and the concerns that you all have and the discussions that you all have. Jeff talked about shifting away from just managing homelessness and kind of just trying to tread water. I think a big part of this housing element is how do we actually build traction to long-term sustainable goals and progress? And I think it's in this housing element. So if you take a look at the housing element, starting on page 92 of the PDF, it breaks down into 8 different goals, and City Council decided what those 8 particular goals are. And I'll quickly just give you the brief titles so you kind of get a sense. So goal 1 is create new housing. Goal 2 is prioritize affordable housing. Goal 3 is provide housing assistance. Goal 4 is promote housing stability. Goal 5 is preserve housing. Goal 6 is engaging the community. Goal 7 is coordinate with regional partners. And goal 8, fund affordable housing. And so when I look at this particular section, I kind of tier off each of these goals. And the top tier, the kind of 10,000 foot view is going to be the goal itself. And again, Rosie, feel free to jump in if I'm getting this wrong. The policies are the next tier down. They kind of give a little more definition to each of those goals. They kind of spell out what is the spirit of those goals. What do we mean by create new housing? What do we mean by fund affordable housing? And then really the meat and potatoes of this particular section are the programs. These are the work efforts that we're committing to in that 8-year cycle. And we have to be specific about which particular department in the city is responsible for that particular work effort. Where do we anticipate that the funding to get that done will come from? In that 8-year period, when do we plan on accomplishing that particular work effort? So we have to be really particularly specific. So I'm going to highlight just a couple of the goals that I think are particularly appropriate for you all, and I think kind of pertain to the conversations that you have in these RAP meetings, and kind of building towards that long-term progress. I would say goal 2, prioritizing affordable housing. I would take a look at that one, those policies, the programs. Goal 3, which is providing housing assistance. And then goal 8 is fund affordable housing. So when I think about these, I think about them kind of like, we need to fund affordable housing. We need to then build affordable housing. And then we also need to keep people in their homes. And we know, we hear stories all the time, anecdotal stories about kind of people who are living in precarious situations, but may eventually are one financial issue away from having to decide between rent or basic necessities. And rent and housing is one of those basic necessities, but having to make those hard decisions. Underneath each of those, you'll notice the programs, and I would say top of my list is that HE25, which is right on the screen, is affordable housing funding. And there are a lot of creative ways that we can open up some funding streams to do everything from partnering with the housing authority or nonprofit developers to develop these affordable housing projects, to providing assistance for seniors that are trying to upgrade appliances that allow their homes to be more accessible as they age. There's a lot of really neat opportunities here, and I just want to point out a couple of others that are kind of tangential to that. One is the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, which is HE12. And the Affordable Housing Trust Fund is an idea of a one-stop shop where we can funnel all of our affordable housing funds and use them for these different types of projects, whether it's building affordable housing, whether it's maintaining affordable housing, whether it is acquiring projects, multi-unit housing that is going on the market for sale. Maybe the housing authority can acquire it using this funding. The idea is we will not get subsidized housing, and that means supportive housing as well, without a subsidy. And one of the ways that we get that subsidy is opening up these funding streams and being able to leverage these funds for other state and federal funds. So again, I would say, if I'm going to go through these, HE25 on the screen, affordable housing funding, HE12, affordable housing trust fund, HE13, which is support rental housing mediation program to keep people in their homes and make sure that we're that renters kind of have the support, that they're not being evicted without cause, and that you can mediate those issues before they get bad. HE20, renters' rights information, so providing renters with their rights so that they understand how eviction is supposed to work, what are the causes that you're able to be evicted, what happens if it's not in that category, what are you owed from your landlord. And then HE15, which is short-term vacation rental ordinance. So we've seen quite a few units on the market become short-term vacation rentals. And one of the ways that we can get ahead of that is by us having a short-term vacation rental ordinance. It does a couple of things, but one, it allows us to enforce. So all of those programs that I had mentioned, and I really encourage you to go through each of those programs that's in that particular section to provide City Council with feedback, because ultimately the direction that comes from City Council is going to guide the direction of this housing element. And that meeting is next Tuesday, and it's going to be really important that if you can be in person, or if you can be there to give live public comment, that is excellent. If not, submit written public comment, and each public comment is taken very seriously. And I believe, Rosie, we're documenting all comments, and they'll receive responses. So yeah, providing information to City Council about which of those programs you support. If you see something that's missing in this housing element, providing that information, and then talking about what your top priorities are. Again, I think there's a lot to be really optimistic about in this housing element, and I'm really hoping that you all show up, engage, and get your public comment out to City Council because it does matter. I'd be more than happy to answer any questions that people have.
Thanks, Gabe. So this is your opportunity, housing advocates. All those who have done this work for a long time, you also are free to comment as you see fit. But if you have questions or comments, please raise your hand or just go ahead and speak up. Go ahead, Tom.
Rev, I see you.
Hey there. So I'm just one of the main things right now that I'm looking at is the fact that affordable housing, you know, when the market's at an all-time high, I think there was a average family house that was going for 1.2 million now in Goleta, or just sold for it. The question is, when we look at the affordability of some of these places, I mean, there are most of the people that are on the street, you know, probably couldn't afford anything. And I mean, who would give them a job, right? And so the point is, when we look at even the index about affordable housing in the United States, or even California alone, you know, is this the main argument about like housing equity and values of properties in order to try to move the dial forward to get housing for people, or is that something that's not even being considered?
I think it's a really good point and a really good question. I think when you look at, and again, I'm speaking for myself, when you look at this housing element and you look at kind of housing in general, especially in the United States and the way we've structured housing and the way that we culturally have viewed housing, those types of issues we can tackle where we can at the local level. And I think one of the ways that we can do that is put nonprofit developers on a more level playing field by providing them the backing and the funding. That's why I put at top of my list is trying to open up those funding streams for nonprofit developers. Now, I think there's a lot that we could do at the state level. I don't foresee any time in the near future us doing anything at the federal level, but definitely at the state level. I mean, we used to build quite a bit of affordable housing. We used to have the redevelopment agency, and there were issues with the redevelopment agency, but when the state took that funding away, it didn't replace it. It didn't try to put that money back into affordable housing. So I think we also need to be able to do two things at once. We need to advocate this at the local level where we can to make adjustments to our housing policy, our zoning policy, to make sure that we are prioritizing affordable housing. At the same time, advocating for our state representatives to push for that state funding that used to exist, that's a revolving fund that's replenished each year that goes into capital A affordable housing. That along with some other policies can level out the playing field and can kind of, there are, in my opinion, some bad actors in the housing market, and we also need policies that address those as well. And I think there are some ways that we could do that at the local level, and there's opportunities in this housing element to do just that.
Thank you.
Did you just say my name, Jeff?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So I noticed a few things. Gabe, you did such a good job spelling it out. Last week, I attended a forum where we were discussing how the Fed rates plan to increase by another 0.75% to 1% by the end of the month in hopes to bring inflation down closer to that 2% margin, which presently is at 9%. And then a separate meeting in regards to how Fannie Mae funding might be accessible for accessory dwelling units and other affordable housing programs. Two things. Do you know if the county and the city are working towards making that our land use planning development that's not in compliance with the state's intention to streamline affordable housing? Is there movement to change that to help that process become streamlined? Because that would also help the accessibility of affordable housing. And then where are we in terms of the housing accountability unit that's now been appointed by the state?
Yeah, good question. So Rosie, I'm not sure about what the city and the county are kind of working towards. But what I can say is in this housing development, there's also another program. It's called the Affordable Housing Overlay. And one of the ways, obviously, many of the details of these programs need to be worked out in the future. This is just us committing to bringing these work efforts forward. But one of the ways that I could see the Affordable Housing Overlay working is with more affordability, you get additional incentives. And those incentives are those streamlined processes for affordable housing. So like by right, instead of having to go to a board or commission for a discretionary approval in which it adds time, it adds cost, it adds also uncertainty, by providing more affordability, you get those by right. That comes with your project because you provided that affordability. It's an exchange between a public good and that expedited process. So that's the first thing. The housing accountability unit, I would take it seriously, to be honest. And I think that these housing elements are important in making sure that we prove that we're acting in good faith. And I think sincerely, as it relates to the housing accountability unit, I think this housing element is us acting in good faith and making a really good faith effort into really prioritizing affordable housing. So I feel really optimistic. I don't think that the city of Santa Barbara is in danger of being at the mercy of the housing accountability unit. But from my understanding, the housing accountability unit should be taken seriously.
Before I go to Sharon,
Thank
Gabe,
you.
would you put your contact information when you get a chance into the
Yeah.
chat for people if they want to follow up? Sharon.
Absolutely.
Hey, Gabe, thank you for the presentation. And I watched the housing element update hearing in the planning commission. I have been pushing the city to look at adopting a vacancy tax, right, as a way to get funding for us to be able to build affordable housing. And I know Rob Fredericks is a fan of the idea. I've worked it with several city council members. I'm not sure why it's not moving really forward. I know in California, you can't just say, well, we're gonna, because of Prop 13, you can't just say there's gonna be a new property tax. You have to, it has to go to the ballot initiative and some other things. But, do you think there'll be support in the city to do something like this? Because you're right, with the missing redevelopment funds, where else would you get funding, right, to be able to do this? And we know that developers are not gonna build affordable housing because it's never gonna pencil out in this kind of market unless it gets subsidized. So I'm just curious what you thought.
Yeah, I think I do. And I think if you look at the HE 25, which is under goal 8, and it's that, give me 1 second, affordable housing funding. In there, one of the potential ways that we can move forward, there's a ton. Vacancy tax, I'm a big fan of a vacancy tax. In the housing element, it documented, I think it was almost 2,600 units that are vacant in the city of Santa Barbara, and they could be vacant for a number of reasons. But of those 2,600, 1,067 units are used for seasonal, recreational, or occasional uses. In other words, second homes, vacation homes. And that's housing stock that is not in our market, right? Those are for out-of-town people that use them occasionally. And the idea is that if that is not their primary home, if that is a home that sits vacant for most of the year, to tax that. And Sharon's right that we would have to go to the voters for that. There are other taxes as well. There's a flipping tax for those that purchase properties just to put a coat of paint on, some cosmetic changes, and then flip it back onto the market for more. There's transfer taxes, there's bond measures, many of which have to go to the voters. I don't know where city council is. It is in the housing element for us to open up those funding streams, and those are some of the opportunities that we may have. The other alternative, to be honest, is a voter initiative for us to collect signatures and put it on the ballot and take it to the people. I think that there are some really attractive arguments to be made for a lot of these taxes. They don't necessarily affect people that live and work here and that are rooted in our community. So there's also a difference too between if it's a city council initiated tax versus a voter initiative. If it's a voter initiative, it's 50% plus one. If it's a city council initiated tax, it's a supermajority, which I believe is over 60%. So these are some of the things that we need to think about and some of the discussions that are happening. But I sincerely believe that a vacancy tax is should be on the table, and it should be something that we particularly look into.
Any other questions or comments related to housing? Gordon.
So thank you so much, Gabe, for your presentation. I guess, you know, just drilling down to the math of the problem. As I understand it, in Santa Barbara City alone, there's 10,000 people who are on the waiting list for affordable housing. That being said, given the current economics of that issue, just for Santa Barbara, I mean, that's $1 billion issue. You know, extrapolate that throughout the county. So, you know, I hate to be pessimistic about, you know, the future of affordable housing because I'm all for it. But I'm also a realist, and you know, at the same time, the number of people who are struggling with chronic homelessness in Santa Barbara County are about 550. And those are the people that we are seeing on the streets that are absolutely suffering with mental health issues, disability, drug and alcohol issues. To me, that is a number we can absolutely address and really, you know, I mean, so I sometimes get, you know, I think I sometimes question whether we conflate the issue of people who are living unsheltered and absolutely destitute and struggling on the street with individuals who, you know, have the wherewithal to get a job and are struggling with economic displacement. And I sympathize with both, but I do feel that our focus absolutely needs to be on those individuals who are suffering the most. And I sometimes feel like they kind of get, you know, left behind in the discussion. And they're also the people that we could actually afford, I think, economically to help. So what are your thoughts?
Yeah, it's a good point, and I agree with many of the points that you highlighted. I think a couple of things. I think one, part of what the funding that we're talking about in this housing element allows nonprofit developers in particular to leverage that for other state and federal funds, because there are opportunities at the state and federal level, and let's face it, that's where the money is. That's where the big money is that gets us to supportive housing for those folks, the 550 folks that you're talking about. But it's very expensive housing that we as a city can't do alone. We have to do it with state and federal resources. And what this funding stream has a potential to do is allow nonprofit developers to leverage that for matching grants, for other funding out there to help them fill that gap, because there's oftentimes a gap of funding and there's not the resources available. I also, another thought I have about your comment is homelessness and housing, and we often talk about it in somewhat like supply and demand terms, and we talk about it, and I think in those conversations, you're right, we do conflate the issue of chronic homelessness and those that really need supportive services with the rest of the conversation. But housing is much more complicated, and I think that there are many people that are living precarious situations that are just one financial hardship away from becoming homeless becoming homeless and losing their home. And we know the deteriorating effects of being homeless. Like, we need to prevent people from even getting to that stage to allow us even the breathing room to focus on that 550. So it's kind of one of those things where we need to be doing multiple things at one time. And I don't want to sugarcoat it. We're not going to do this overnight. We're not going to do it in one fell swoop. We're building a foundation for long-term progress. And it's not as satisfying as us promising that we can make big strides. But I think towards the end of this 8-year period, we are going to start seeing progress, and we are going to start seeing some change. And we're going to build that foundation so that beyond that, we can actually tackle some of these really hard problems that we've been discussing for far too long.
All right, thanks. We could go on because there's so much to talk
Yeah.
about. I really appreciate you joining and everyone being on the call. We named our son Kairos, the Greek term that means appointed time. There are appointed times, right, for things to happen. And I feel like the housing element gives us an appointed time to charge together in the direction of, let's get to these low to very low housing numbers that we need to get to for our street population. And depending, Gordon, you bring up some good points about who are we talking about when we're having this conversation. But across the board, I would like you, so I think we need a cross sector of folks to join in on the advocacy around what Gabe has brought before us. And we will send some talking points out to all of our partners for sure following this call. But I would really look for a cross sector of people to show up Tuesday, from faith community leaders, hotel owners, businesses, service providers, advocates, people experiencing homelessness, to come to City Council, use your public comment time and advocate for the pieces you think that are most important for our friends and families on the streets. So I'm going to ask you, if you wouldn't mind, if you're going to write a letter, or if you are planning on being at City Council on Tuesday, you could just raise your hand on the screen. That would be, you can either raise your hand or you can use the emoji thing. But I just really want us to commit as a community to this opportunity we have now. And on behalf of the Regional Action Plan, like I said, you have all seen the amount of commitment the county and the city and the service providers are putting forward together. So we have a lot of capacity that's been built over the last few years. We just need to have the places for people to go. So I want to thank everyone on this call who's been at this for years, and just really appreciate the collaborative effort. So we will see many of you on Tuesday night. We will follow up with an email with some of the talking points and the link to the tax credits, homeless hiring tax credit, so you can watch that as well. If you're a business or hotel owner, there are ways you can hire people now, and you'll get credit. You'll get some funding for that back to you. So that's a great way to be a part of the solution as well. So thanks, everyone. We'll see you at the next call.